Good evening and welcome to then video chapter number 14 in this series. And what I want to do today is to look, as it says on the screen, indeed, some of the key dates in the history of multiculturalism and diversity in the United Kingdom over the last 80 or so years. And so that you'll have some sort of milestone, some sort of set of milestones to help you, sort of the big events. And so I'm going to take them by groups of four. So first of all, from the 30s to the 60s here, you can see 1936, Cable Street, 1948, Windrush, 1958, the riots in Notting Hill, and 1962 Commonwealth Immigration Act. You may know a little about some of these, but it's good to have them all sorted out and in line. And so if we begin with Cable Street, then Cable Street is in connection with fascism in the 1930s. Now, of course, fascism in Italy and in Germany are very, very famous, and people know something perhaps about fascism in France at the big demonstrations of 1934 of the far right and so on. But people tend to know rather little about the far right in Britain in the 1930s. But in fact, it was quite important. First of all, there was a whole section of the elite who were quite sympathetic to Adolf Hitler before in 32, 33, 34, 35, and so on. For example, the founder, not the founder, the first director general of the BBC, John Wraith, expressed his admiration for Hitler in the years before the war, up to 1937, 1938, saying, yes, Hitler has the right idea. And those of you who have been watching the Netflix series The Crown will have understood that a section of the royal family was also very much friends with leading Nazis in Germany. But it was also a political movement, and you can see this when you look at this picture, you think, oh, well, this must be Italy or perhaps Germany. But in fact, this is in Britain, this is in London. This is Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists. And although, as I guess you understood, the fascism was not victorious in Britain, it was pretty powerful when Oswald Mosley had meetings in the early 1930s. He could have them in a football stadium, so he could have really enormous meetings. And in any case, in 1936, he decided to have a special march in London to reinforce the fascists, and he said, well, we're going to march through the East End. The East End of London was the Jewish part of London. This is where the Jewish working class lived. And so obviously this was an enormous provocation. You can imagine if Le Pen organized a march through Barbès, Rochechouart in Paris or something like that. And in any case, this was set up. And so the left and the local Jewish organizations and the Labour Party had to decide how to react to this. And there was an enormous fight, enormous debate about it, when some people saying, we have to stop them. We cannot let them march through the Jewish part of London, and other people on the left saying, oh, no, well, we must ignore them. If you ignore them, they will go away. Yeah, they will lose their importance. In any case, although there were organizations who did not support it, a very large number of local Jews and trade unionists and communists went along to Cable Street, where Oswald Mosley's march was supposed to march past, and they stopped them. The police were protecting Oswald Mosley, and there was quite a lot of fighting. But the important thing is that Mosley's march was stopped, and the fascist party was demoralized and did not recover for a long time. Indeed, could not recover in the 30s because of the arrival of the war. One of the reasons for this is that fascist organizations don't really group together people who have the same interests, and so their demonstrations in the streets are far more important than those of other organizations. In any case, the victory of Cable Street, where the population stopped the fascists from marching, has become an enormous symbol of anti-fascism in Britain. And you can see here there's a mural that was put up a couple of decades ago to commemorate Cable Street. So a local mural. Here we are with the past and the present again. Here's a detail of mural there. And there's also a blue plaque. It's not blue. The Battle of Cable Street. The people of East London rallied to Cable Street on the 4th of October 1936 and forced back the march of the fascist Oswald Mosley and his black shirts through the streets of the East End. And so the slogan then, "They shall not pass." Remember, this is 1936. In Spain, there is a war going on, a civil war going on between General Franco and his fascists and the elected Republican government, and quite a number of British and French men went over there to fight the fascists. So that's the atmosphere of the 1930s. We're going to move through the decades fairly swiftly, and there's another actual photograph of Cable Street there. We're going to move through the decades fairly swiftly and move on to our next milestone, which I've already mentioned to you, which was this symbolic arrival in 1948 of the Windrush, this ship full of men from the Caribbean coming to work in London. And this has become a symbol, and you can see here that you have both, here you have I think a record for the 65th anniversary, and also a square, a street in London named after the Windrush, and that's the importance of it. There was also a tremendous scandal just a few years ago, when a series of people who had come over with the Windrush, or at the same time in the other ships, were threatened with expulsion by the British government, because in fact what had happened is that at the time in the 1940s, they wanted people to come, and there's lots of work, and so they were not always very careful about the papers, and the government didn't mind too much if you had the proper papers or not. But in an attempt to show how tough they were on immigration, just recently the Conservative government decided that they would be very strict on papers, and a whole series of people who were either born in Britain or who had come over with Windrush were actually sent back to the Caribbean, expelled from the country. And this caused an enormous scandal that people who had lived and worked in Britain for decades were being expelled by charter. And this was an enormous political explosion just a few years back. If you look up Windrush scandal, you will find it there. So moving on, we're now in the post-war boom. There's lots of jobs around, and nevertheless, it's a period when popular racism is very strong. Yeah, that black people might find that they were not allowed to rent housing and so on. And one of the important events here is the Notting Hill riots of 1958. And now there had been a series of events where white teddy boys from London had been attacking black people, and in particular they tended to attack mixed couples, black and white couples, because that's something which terrifies racists particularly. But something new happened in 1958, and that was, what was new was not young white men attacking black people. It was that in 1958, there was a whole group of young black men who decided to fight back. And for several days, there was fighting in the streets of Notting Hill between local black people and white racists. And so that was a very symbolic moment, 1958. Now, for the government, this was a moment where they thought, oh my, terrible, there's fighting in the streets, we have to do something. And we will be looking at that in just a moment. And the two pictures we have here, you can see, first of all, you can see an anti-racist slogan painted on the wall there, no color bar here. Yeah, this slogan refuses the idea of having a color bar, that is for jobs, for example, whites only, or for housing, whites only, so no color bar. And on the other, you can see a couple of black people in London protesting about the murder in Notting Hill, the violence in Notting Hill, and using the slogan "Black and white can live together in harmony." Now, the government had two reactions to this new visible and violent racism. Remember that there was certainly not it was not a priority of government at the time to fight racism. It was much more, the priority was to keep things calm. In fact, they did two things in reaction to this new tension. The first thing is that they introduced for the first time a law which limited immigration from the Black Commonwealth, that is to say, from India, from Pakistan, from Jamaica, and so on and so forth, or these places. You can see here the title of the act. It's the Commonwealth Immigrants Act, and its long title is "An Act to Make Temporary Provision for Controlling the Immigration into the United Kingdom of Commonwealth Citizens, to authorize the deportation, etc., etc., and to make it harder for people from these parts of the world to come in." But notice the first line: "An act to make temporary provision." So we're going to limit immigration temporarily. This was following the theory that if too many people come at the same time, this will cause racism. This is not a theory which I think is true, but it was a theory which was accepted by some of the governments at the time. In fact, it says temporary provision, but in fact, it was never repealed, and it remained permanent. And so this idea of reducing the number of Indians and Pakistanis and Caribbeans who could come to live in Britain. And indeed, by the 1970s, most of the new immigrants coming over from these places are family of people who are already established in Britain. The fresh new families coming over, it became almost, they almost disappeared at that point. And the second reaction was the first Race Relations Act, that we'll come to in a moment. But here I have a group of three dates then: 1965, the first Race Relations Act; and 1968, an extremely well-known speech, the Rivers of Blood speech; and 1977, the Anti-Nazi League. So let's have a look at those briefly, each of them. So first of all, the Race Relations Act. So this was the other side of it, that the theory at the time of both Conservative and Labour governments, really, although there were differences, was first of all, limit the number of people coming in from these parts of the world, hoping perhaps that this would mean there was less cause for racism. Racism doesn't work like that, but there you go. And secondly, to punish to some extent racist discrimination within Britain. Now, so 1965 was the first Race Relations Act, and this act made it a civil offence to refuse to serve somebody in a shop or in a pub, to serve somebody with unreasonable delay, or to overcharge them on the grounds of colour, race, or ethnic or national origins. So this means that before 1965, any shop in the country could say, "Oh, I don't want to serve black people, so I'm not going to." But after 1965, that was a civil offence. A civil offence, what does that mean? It means you can't call, if you're a black person, you go into a shop and they won't serve you, you can't call the police. But you can find a lawyer and take them to court and sue them. Of course, it takes a lot of energy, but so it's a very, if you like, it's a very weak anti-racist law. But to be fair on the British, it was probably more advanced than what was available in other countries of Europe at that times. Now, 1968 is a particular crisis because a leader of the Conservative Party, who was in the shadow cabinet, made an extremely inflammatory speech in where was it? Was it in Bristol or Birmingham? I can't. It's slipped my mind. And in any case, what he says, and it's called the Rivers of Blood speech, because he said basically what he said is black and white people cannot live together in harmony. There are so many black people here now that they are going to dominate the white people and make them suffer. And indeed, if we don't send the black people back to other countries, then we will see rivers of blood in the streets of our cities. Yeah, so for Enoch Powell, multiculturalism and black and white people living together in peace, harmony, or indifference was impossible, and the only future possible of this mixed society was horrible, bloody conflict. Now, of course, we know today that this was completely untrue, because there's been relatively little bloody conflict over the last 50 years. But at the time, this was an absolute political earthquake. First of all, he got quite a lot of support from the population. And indeed, two groups of people, dockers and immigration workers, actually came out on strike in support of Enoch Powell. That is, that they organized a racist strike, which is extremely rare animal in British history. Now, in fact, he had gone too far for the Conservative Party leadership, and he was sacked from his post in the shadow cabinet. But he became very popular and a focus of racist opinion for a number of years. And there you can see another slogan. There's a well-known photograph: Powell for Prime Minister. Yes, and every Enoch Powell became the hero of every white racist. The racism tended to get worse in the 1970s, because we got to the end of the post-war boom, and from 1974, 1975, 1976, you could see mass unemployment again. And it is no great surprise to hear that when things are going very badly and there's mass unemployment, people, some of the more limited people, will be looking around for people to blame. Is it the fault of the immigrants? Is it the fault of the Jews, etc.? And so in the mid-1970s, the extreme right groups, such as the National Front, were getting far more votes in local elections. Now, they were nowhere near the level that Le Pen got to in France, but nevertheless, they could get, 20% in one town, 20% in another town. And one of the reactions of the anti-racists was to organize the Anti-Nazi League, and the Anti-Nazi League in 1977. Now, this was a very big organization and very easy to join. It's very cheap to join, and it didn't involve going to meetings and so on. And it had two aims. The Anti-Nazi League had two aims. First of all, to tell everybody that the National Front were Nazis, and to explain why. And secondly, to stop any National Front meeting or any National Front march, on the grounds that if they couldn't have meetings and they couldn't march, they would not be able to recruit new people, and they would be demoralized. And so you would see many thousands of badges around of all sorts. Single parents against the Nazis, building working against the Nazis, West Ham United supporters against the Nazis. There was also skinheads against the Nazis, anything you like against the Nazis, some of them quite amusing one. I remember left-wing Guardian readers against the Nazis. And they also did mass leafletings in the parts of town where the National Front got a lot of votes. They would go from door to door: we're the Anti-Nazi League, we're here to explain to you why the National Front are Nazis and why you should not be supporting them. And I have to say it was very successful, because suddenly the National Front were no longer cool, and it was a very young organization, a lot of young people involved, and the National Front vote began to fall fairly quickly. So a very remarkable thing, and it worked along. There you have on the left a history of the Anti-Nazi League by Dave Renton, When We Touch the Sky. There's also, it's a very nice, it's a very good documentary. I wonder if I can find it. And on the right, Skins Against Nazis, then Skins Against Skinheads against Nazis. Skinheads is an interesting story, actually, because the very first skinheads used to love ska music, black music, and it was later on that skinhead culture got involved with the far right. At the same time as the Anti-Nazi League, there was a parallel movement, if you like, set up called the Rock Against Racism, which organized hundreds of small concerts around the country, which always had a punk band, usually white because punks were white, a reggae band, usually black because reggae people were black, on the same stage. And with the black band at the top of the bill. And the idea was simply rock against racism, that we have a big rock concert, black and white people together, to show we're against racism. It was quite a new idea, and slightly strange in a way, this idea of, rock, why music is new. It's not pizza eating against racism, or jogging against racism. It was rock against racism. So it took on this idea that rock music at the time, and music in general, is extremely important to young people, and that young people, teenagers and young adults, are the people who it is most important to get detached from racist ideas. You see, these are cheap concerts with not necessarily very famous, famous groups. It was very, very big. There were hundreds and hundreds of concerts. And it led to a huge carnival in London with the Anti-Nazi League and Rock Against Racism together, including some of the most well-known 1970s stars, the Tom Robinson Band, a political rock band who I recommend, Steel Pulse, one of the best, well-known, the best-known reggae bands, and X-Ray Specs, what's the word? A punk rock band. They had a big march and then a carnival, and it was very, very big, very visible. Young people and music rejecting racism, and it was very impressive at the time. So to move on to after, I'm going through the decades very quickly, but to move on to some subsequent events. 1993, the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence. I put a video upon about that last week, so perhaps you had time to look at it. I know you're pretty busy. 1999, the publication of the Macpherson Report. 2000, a new Race Relations Act. 2003, another act about employment equality, religion and belief, and the 2010 Equality Act. So I'm going to go through these one by one. First of all, then, I'm going to go a little bit more briefly than this about this one, because I think I have mentioned it before, and in any case, there is a video online on the blog about it. This is the gentleman, the young man who was murdered by racists in 1993, and what was specific about it is it became clear very quickly that local people knew who this racist gang was, but that the police were not trying to catch them. And indeed, the police were not successful, and they left it too long, and they didn't get the evidence, and so it was not possible. The story is a little longer than that, but it was not possible to get the murderers. Now, the next stage, this is a few years later, after a couple of years, there was a campaign that people were shocked by the fact that the police were not really interested in catching the murderers. This is interesting in itself, because there had been other racist murders in the past, and in the 1970s there had been racist murders, but it didn't cause a big scandal, really. It has to be said that public opinion was not very interested. And it seems that by 1993, the ideas about racism had changed somewhat in the population, and so it became a national scandal. And you have this headline, which is absolutely incredibly impressive, which says on the front page, "These 5 men are murderers." Now, if you've ever met any journalists, you know it's extremely dangerous to call somebody a murderer on the front page, because if they take you to court and you can't prove it, then they could probably get $1 million of damages. You could not just allowed to this. Now, of course, none of these men did take them to court. But what's special about this is that this front page is not from Socialist Worker or Red Flag or some left-wing newspaper. It's from a very conservative newspaper. And so this is a symbol of how things had changed in Britain, that a conservative newspaper thought that their readers would be interested in justice for this black man who was murdered by racists. So things had changed. Now, what happened after the change of government in 1997 is that the new government, the Labour government, decided to have an inquiry about this, about what happened. Why did the police not want to help? And in 1999, 6 years after the murder, there was the publication of this Macpherson report, led by Sir William Macpherson. A very, very respected gentleman, not a radical at all. And yet this report was political dynamite, a political explosion, because it said the Metropolitan Police of London are institutionally racist. I quote, institutionally racist. That means that there's not a few racists. They are organized as a racist organization. absolute political explosion. And one of the results was a whole series of new laws in 2000, not just about the police, but in general about changing public organizations, government organizations, schools, universities, hospitals, etc., so that they would not be working on racist assumptions. And this law introduced the duty of all public bodies to promote racial equality, I quote. That means that it's not enough for a university or a hospital or a local government or the police force to avoid discriminating. No, they need to promote racial equality. Let me give you the example. I can't remember if I've given you this one before, but I give it you again. If you take a hospital in London, which has 1,000 workers and 100 managers, among the 1,000 workers, half of them are black. That's not surprising. Among the 100 managers, only 5 are black. We're not surprised. Sadly, we're not surprised. Now, according to this law, the hospital must prove that they are doing something to solve this problem that only 5% of the managers are black when half of the workers are black. Now, the law does not tell them exactly what to do, but it says every year they must produce a report to show that they are taking action against this racial equality. And they do a whole series of things. For example, they might decide, this imaginary hospital might decide that recruitment committees for managers will always be half white and half black, always, because we know that committees recruit people who resemble them, even when they don't want to discriminate. And even if for the recruitment committee, they have to bring a black manager from Glasgow and another one from Manchester and another one from Birmingham, so that they can have a committee which is half black and half white. That's what they do. That's just one example, but there's a whole series of things that they do to promote racial equality. Now, that was related to Stephen Lawrence, and Stephen Lawrence became an extremely well-known and symbolic event. And indeed, in 2012, when the Olympic Games were held in London, Stephen Lawrence's mother was the person who carried the Olympic torch into the stadium. What did this mean? This meant that the British establishment wanted to tell the world that they were ashamed of this racist police force and they wanted to change it. Now, I would like to be able to give you much more information about what has changed. I don't really have a lot, but I think that needs to be studied more carefully. 2003, you have another new regulation put out by the government about employment. And this is about discrimination on the grounds of religious belief. And this is extremely British and extremely and not, we couldn't imagine this in France at the moment. And what it says is that employers must make reasonable accommodation for employees' religious beliefs. What does that mean? Well, imagine you have a hospital, no, not a hospital, sorry, not a hospital, a supermarket. You have a supermarket with 100 workers. And 2 of these are religious Jews, devout Jews, and they really don't want to work in the alcohol section. Under this law, the supermarket employer, the manager, is obliged to say, okay, no problem. You don't want to work in the alcohol section, you don't have to. That is the law. The manager doesn't have any choice. However, if this is a small shop with only 2 workers, in that case, the employer would be entitled to say to a religious Jewish, devout Jewish employee, I'm sorry, I can't make any changes because there's only 2 people and we really need an employee who will serve alcohol. Another example, in a hospital, the same hospital, let's say with 1,000 workers, and let's say there's 150 Muslims, not surprising in London. If the Muslims ask for a prayer room, a room where they can go and pray, the manager is obliged to say, okay, yes, we have a room. Because it's a big hospital, there's quite a lot of Muslims, it appears reasonable in the terms of the law to have a prayer room. However, again, if they have a little shop with just one worker or 2 workers, then they're not obliged to, because it's not considered to be reasonable. So this is a big change in the attitude to religion in public. And as you can see, this is 2003, which is just the year before the law in 2004, which said that if you wore a headscarf as a Muslim woman, you were not allowed to go to high school with it on. So you can see that these are the two different ways that this question has been dealt with. So this is called the public sector equality. All of this is called the public sector equality duty, and it continues like that. So all of these different laws, both about racial equality and also about sex equality, were put together into the 2010 Equality Act. So I'm just going to finish with a couple of examples from the last few years of reactions to multiculturalism and racism and so on. But first of all, what is multiculturalism? Here is a definition that somebody wrote. Multiculturalism in the modern world involves, on the one hand, the acceptance of a single culture and a single set of individual rights governing the public domain, and on the other hand, a variety of folk cultures in the private, domestic, and communal domains. And so that's a definition which has been suggested by John Rex of what is multiculturalism. That is to say that it means that the law about drinking and driving, or whatever, the general law is the same for everybody, but there are particular rights which are particular cultures which are considered to be positive, which reign in communal domains. I would like to say more about this next week. However, there is a lot of debate about this. People do not agree about it, and some people, like Kenan Malik, says the idea of a plural or multicultural society is a deeply ambiguous one. The concept of multiculturalism overestimates the homogeneity and autonomy of the various ethnic groups, because it's true that it can be very difficult to understand what exactly is a culture. So if you have somebody who is born of Indian parents who goes to a school in London, and the person who lives next to her, who works next to her, comes from Irish parents, and so do they have different cultures? They go to the same school, they listen to the same music, they have the same idea of what job they want, they're very much Londoners. So what do we mean if we say they have different cultures? What are we talking about exactly? It can become rather vague, and certainly some people accuse certain operators, whether it be cultural centres or theatres or singers, of exploiting an idea that these are different cultures in order to get some public money. So these are not things which are very easy to understand. So a few responses to diversity questions today. Here's one. This was a few years ago, and this is the rise of the Black Pound, and it's a day for Black people to discuss how we can best fight racism. And in the opinion of these people, what you need to do is, if you're Black, go to buy your clothes at a Black shop and buy your food at a Black shop. Encourage Black business. That's a suggestion for what can be done. Quite a different suggestion is to campaign against racism. So these are mixed groups, Black and white together, and this particular campaign was actually quite successful, called Show Racism the Red Card, because one of the places that racist organizations and far-right organizations would recruit was outside the football matches. And there've been a number of problems of racist fans shouting racist insults during football matches against the Black players. And so one group of campaigners said, well, instead of giving out leaflets outside the supermarket on a Saturday morning against racism, let's go to the place where you can find the racists, at the football grounds, and do this Show Racism the Red Card with information for everybody about the racist lies and why it's not true that immigrants are taking your job, why it's not true that immigrants get easier access to social housing and so on and so forth. It began very small. It's become quite big to such an extent that here you have Sheffield United, and they're all, I don't know if you can see, but they're all holding Show Racism the Red Card. Yes, so it's been possible to get footballers involved with that. This one, that's 2009, but the one on the right, 2015. Then this has been a little bit of a remake, if you like, of Rock Against Racism, but in the 21st century. There was a new rise of racist organizations, and a number of people said, hey, well, Rock Against Racism was really good in the 1970s. We need something like that. But of course, they couldn't call it Rock Against Racism because for a lot of young people, rock is the kind of music that their grandmother listens to, or their grandfather. And so, you know, so instead of saying hip hop against racism, or they left it easy and open, love music, hate racism. And you have to read this, I love music and I hate racism. And so you can see that this one in 2015 was to raise money for refugees in Calais. And so they love music, hate racism concerts. There are from time to time far right organizations which set up, and there's a campaign, a trade union campaign against the British National Party, a fascist organization. There's also been new kinds of racist organizations like the English Defence League, who campaign against mosques. These have remained fairly small, and it's generally, if they have a demonstration, there's 100 or 200 people and more anti-racists on the other side of the street shouting against them. And here's the latest example. New organizations Stand Up to Racism. I mean, new, it's probably 10 years old, in November 2018, yes. So that the different tensions and conflicts are still going on. Just finally, the new, what's the word? The new test which was imposed on immigrants from 2005 on and still on today. You have to have a test that shows that you want to integrate British culture. Now, this is very controversial because some people say, oh, well, yeah, this is good. You know, people want to integrate British culture. That's the sort of people we want. Whereas other people say, well, of course, they just study it from a book. So the aim of the test is to make everybody think that immigrants are a problem. So here you have some of the examples of the test. How often does the cabinet, the Conseil des Ministres, normally meet? Daily, twice a week, weekly, monthly? I have to say, I have no idea. And there are a series of other questions there. What is the population of Wales? Is it 1.2 million, 2.9 million, 3.4 million? Again, I don't know the answers to these, so maybe I wouldn't be allowed to be British. I have the answers underneath there. Also, here is a particular sort of campaign against racism and to try to put forward a positive view of what immigrants are. And this campaign was run. I am an immigrant. Yeah, I'm an English teacher. I'm a psychologist. I'm a lawyer, and so on. And it was around the place. But then some anti-racist campaigners noticed that this was all about being a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer. And they wanted to say, well, you know, I'm in favor of immigrants, even if they're not, even if they don't have a prestigious job. And so they brought out these campaigns. Yeah, I'm an immigrant, I'm a cleaner, and I organize your life. I'm an immigrant, I'm a builder, I build your homes. To say that working class immigrants also do not deserve racism. So that was the last of my video chapters about racism, and I look forward to seeing you for the live class next Wednesday. Arrêtez de partager.